I think leadership styles have changed a lot over the last 20 years. Leaders have had to become better at listening, better at communicating, more empathetic. I think if you went back 20 years, I mean, you would see the characteristic of leaders principally as having the power, the authority, the control, and setting direction, almost without question, the king of the hill, if you will. I think today's world requires a much more open style of management. It's more the leader as the team manager, getting the best out of his people or her people in the organisation. The reason why so much of leadership style, I think, has had to change is because of the changing circumstances. I always begin with this notion of trust. I mean, if you look at what's happening today, I mean, the so-called Wall Street occupations, which I think have hit now between 70 and 80 countries around the world, young people really challenging and questioning leadership at every level, political leadership, business leadership, and so on. So there's a lot more challenge of what good leadership really is. There's a much higher expectation from people about open leadership styles, as I've already said. So leaders who listen, leaders who are gathering opinions and helping to set a sense of direction, but they are listening to others and helping to build consensus. We've got so many different challenges in business as well. I mean, the rate of change, the uncertainty in the business environment, and I think all of that, in addition to anything else, points to the notion that leaders can't know everything. It's just not possible. And that, again, engenders this notion that leaders have got to be better at listening, they've got to be better at building from other people's ideas and helping to set a sense of direction from that. A leader in today's world, first of all, has got to be very self-aware. I mean, one of the ideas that Kevin talks a lot about in the book is that leaders are on show all the time. They live in a fishbowl with all of the modern communication media. So they have to be terribly self-aware, and that means that they've got to be clear about who they are, clear about their own style, and they've got to be consistent and authentic in that. I mean, it's what the Americans like to talk about as walking the talk. So if you're saying things but then acting differently, or you're not consistent in that, then that's going to come through in all sorts of ways. And that will fundamentally affect integrity. And a lot of the research the Institute of Leadership and Management, which I chair, has done around leadership, points to this notion of integrity as being one of the fundamental drivers of trust. So as I said, I think the first attribute is self-awareness. It's then linked to this notion of authenticity and integrity, so that you're consistent. You've got to be a good listener. And of course, as emphasized many times in the book, you've got to be a great communicator. But it's being a great communicator through all forms. It's not just the traditional, I'm going to stand up and give a big speech, but you've got to be communicating all the time, 24 hours a day almost. So I think it's a fascinating time for leaders, and I think it does set new challenges, but I think it creates many new opportunities as well. I've always believed, to be honest, that leaders can be made, good leaders can be made. Now, you can think of many great leaders throughout history, whether it's Winston Churchill or Roosevelt or whomever, and there's clearly circumstances that can create opportunities to build great leaders. Cometh the man, cometh the hour kind of idea. But actually you can replicate that in many senses in an organisation. It's a notion that I talk about as crucibles of experience, because I think all leadership research has shown is that people learn principally by doing. Yes, you can teach them good practice and good principles of leadership, but they learn principally by doing. And they will learn most when they're put into, if you like, difficult circumstances that require them to individually stretch. And those are this notion of what I call crucibles. And those happen all the time in business, and you can actually create them in terms of developing new leaders. You can create opportunities for people to step outside of their comfort zone and experience new stuff. And how they respond to that and what they learn personally from that is absolutely fundamental to building good leaders. And it goes back to this notion of being, as I said, self-aware. And I think a lot of leadership teaching and a lot of then experience that you have as an individual leader, is actually learning about yourself, learning where your gaps are, where your strengths are, playing to those strengths, but equally in acknowledging the gaps. And I think this is another attribute of good leaders, is surrounding yourself with people that will help complement those gaps for you. They're not just mini-me's, they are people that actually help complement my capabilities. So you get this notion, again, that, as I say, the leader is the head of the team, and best leaders build best teams around them in order to execute, if you like, a broader team management style. My own leadership style, I always like to think, is an open and listening style. I've worked with very diverse teams. I've worked with very international teams, virtual teams. I mean, part of the context of changing leadership is, leaders today typically can't walk out of their office and just announce to the assembled crowd outside their office what they're thinking about. You're managing teams all over the place, virtual, in different time zones, very, very much more diverse. And so I've learned a lot through that in terms of my own leadership style, that particularly when you're dealing with very diverse teams, different cultural backgrounds, different languages as their kind of mother tongue and so forth, that you have to be really good at listening. You've got to be very, again, self-aware. And none of that is to say that you shouldn't have a point of view and you shouldn't have an opinion. So I've always believed in my own personal leadership style that yes, I try to listen. Yes, I try to be open in that acceptance of other people's ideas. But equally, I've got my own point of view. And that point of view I've always talked about as having a teachable point of view. Because, again, if there's one thing that's more important than almost anything else amongst good leaders, is they develop other people. And I was fortunate to spend many years in an organisation that was one of its core values. It talked about this notion of stewardship, and that the most important value that we had as leaders was actually the development of others, and bringing those people through behind you. Because the legacy of any leader today, even if we're running great businesses and institutions, is those great businesses and institutions continue without us, and when we're gone and when we've moved on. But the people that we leave behind never forget. They never forget a good leader. They never forget the leader that gave them the opportunity to grow and to develop. And as I said, learn through doing, through these sort of crucible opportunities. So those are values that I've always held very dear. And I would say my greatest successes as a leader is bringing other people through, and bringing those people through often in adversity, or when they themselves didn't believe in themselves, and helping to infuse that sense of self-belief. Thing to say is anybody with leadership aspirations should be encouraged, but I think that there are many things which are important. First of all, it's very important to be realistic. I think it's quite easy as the senior person, the coach or the mentor, to give lots of good news and say, yes, you're doing fine, you're going to be the next big leader. But you've got to be able to be realistic. You've got to be able to assess and understand a person's real, not just current performance, but potential. And then what trajectory are they on? So for an individual perspective, then of course it's being realistic about that yourself. I may want to aspire to those senior roles, but am I really ready for them? Will I perhaps ever be ready for them? And what is my kind of natural level in which I could operate? I always go back to one of my favourite principles of leadership, which is the Peter Principle, which is that everybody's promoted to a point of their own incompetence. And that just says that, yes, of course, leaders are always learning, you're always stretching, but from an individual perspective, then you've got to be very realistic about where you are at any point in time in that journey, what you still need to learn, so that you're not putting yourself forward or believing you should be put forward into a role that you're not ready quite yet to fulfill. So that sense of realistic expectations is extremely important. I think, coupled to that, of course, is back to what I said before, this point about self-awareness. What really are my individual strengths, and equally, what are my gaps? What do I need to learn? And that sense of, I think what a lot of people talk about around self-awareness is that sense of humility. I don't know everything, and I never will. So understanding that and seeking out others who can help guide me and mentor me and coach me and be part of my team that, as I say, complement my skills and capabilities, I think is always the path of development for any leader. And related to that, I think the other thing I would highlight is this idea of networking, which I think is one of the most underrated business skills. I think good leaders and good senior leaders are great networkers. They reach out to others, they keep connections, they learn from other people, they seek advice. And when I say network, it's not just about the people who you're most directly working with, it's people in all sorts of walks of life and fields of experience, because actually innovation comes from breadth of experience. So good networkers help to build their own leadership capability and infuse the good ideas that make them successful.